Good evening. I'm Nova Blake, and this is your complete political briefing for Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. Today, China confronts America over its Iran blockade as the International Monetary Fund warns the war has halted global economic momentum. Let's get into it. But before we do, please subscribe to this channel to watch our daily bulletin every morning at 6 a.m., starting with the top stories from across the American political landscape. China has formally condemned the United States' naval blockade of Iranian ports as dangerous and irresponsible, issuing a sharp diplomatic warning on Tuesday as the blockade entered its second day. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun told reporters that the blockade would only intensify tensions, exacerbate the fragile ceasefire, and jeopardize freedom of navigation in the strait. China imports roughly one-third of its crude oil through the Persian Gulf, making it one of the nations most economically exposed to any prolonged disruption of Strait of Hormuz shipping. And Beijing's public condemnation signals a growing international confrontation over the legality and consequences of the United States military action. A new round of direct talks between the United States and Iran could take place as early as this week. Two officials familiar with the negotiations told reporters on Tuesday, April 14th. The possible second round of talks would follow the collapse of negotiations in Islamabad, Pakistan, on Sunday after 21 hours of discussions failed to produce a deal. The central sticking point, confirmed by multiple sources, was nuclear enrichment, with United States negotiators proposing a 20-year halt to Iran's uranium enrichment, while Iranian officials countered with a proposal to suspend enrichment for only 3 to 5 years. Pakistan has offered to host a second round in Islamabad, and a date has not been finalized as of Tuesday. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, released its World Economic Outlook on Tuesday, April 14th, slashing its global growth forecast for 2026 from 3.3% down to 3.1%, directly attributing the downgrade to the United States and Israel's war against Iran. The IMF also raised its global inflation forecast to 4.4% for this year, up from 3.8% projected in January, as energy prices soar following the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourin has wrote that the war in the Middle East has abruptly darkened the global outlook and warned that if the conflict persists into 2027, global growth could fall as low as 2%, a threshold crossed only 4 times since 1980. Congress returned from a 2-week recess on Tuesday, facing one of the most consequential legislative weeks in recent memory. Democrats in both the House and Senate announced plans to force votes this week on war powers resolutions that would require the Trump administration to terminate military operations against Iran unless Congress explicitly authorizes them. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the 2-week ceasefire, in his words, not a strategy and not a diplomatic solution, and vowed that Congress must reassert its constitutional authority. A previous war powers resolution failed in the House in early March, with 2 Republicans voting in favor, and Democratic leaders believe the shifting political landscape, including the president's declining approval ratings, could produce enough Republican crossover votes to pass this time. Representative Eric Swalwell of California announced Monday, April 13th, that he will resign from Congress days after suspending his campaign for California governor amid sexual assault allegations from multiple women, including a former staffer who alleged he assaulted her twice. The House Ethics Committee opened a formal investigation Monday. Republican Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida has announced plans to force an expulsion vote on the House floor, and Democrats are expected to simultaneously push for expulsion of Republican Representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas, who admitted to having an extramarital affair with a staffer who later died by suicide. Gonzalez has dropped his re-election bid but had not yet resigned from Congress as of Tuesday. Israel and Lebanon held direct diplomatic talks in Washington on Tuesday, their first high-level engagement since 1993, hosted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The talks lasted approximately 2 hours and were focused on the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah, which has continued despite the broader Iran ceasefire. Hezbollah's leader rejected the talks as futile, while Israel's military continued operations in southern Lebanon, where the Israeli Defense Forces stated they are establishing a buffer zone. Lebanon's death toll from Israeli strikes is approaching 2,100 people, with at least 88 medics among those killed, according to Lebanese health authorities. A poll released by CBS News on Sunday found that 60% of American adults disapprove of United States military action against Iran, while only 40% approve. The survey also found that 61% of Americans believe the war is going badly. 66% say the president has not clearly explained United States goals in the conflict, and 62% say he does not have a clear plan for ending the war. The poll comes as Republicans are already bracing for a difficult midterm election environment in November, with the Iran war, high gas prices, and inflation now central issues confronting the majority in both chambers. Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, traveled to Beijing on Tuesday for high-level consultations with Chinese officials on the Middle East crisis, a diplomatic coordination that underscores the degree to which the United States blockade of Iran is drawing in major global powers. Both Russia and China have condemned the American and Israeli military campaign against Iran, and both have economic and strategic interests in the outcome of the conflict. The visit comes as Russian state media quoted Lavrov expressing Moscow's readiness to help find solutions to what he called the unprovoked American and Israeli aggression against Iran. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, issued a warning Tuesday that the disruption to global trade through the Strait of Hormuz could lead to a food catastrophe if not resolved quickly. The FAO's chief economist stated that agricultural supply chains, including fertilizer, which transits through the strait, are directly tied to the crop calendar, and any extended disruption could reduce yields and drive food shortages in the following growing season. The warning adds to growing global alarm about the cascading economic and humanitarian consequences of a war that has already driven oil prices above $100 per barrel and raised consumer inflation across dozens of nations. A CBS News poll released Sunday also found that 60% of Americans say the United States' war goals in Iran are changing and unclear, while the administration is simultaneously navigating a record partial government shutdown at the Department of Homeland Security, now 60 days long, and potential expulsion proceedings against multiple members of Congress. House Speaker Mike Johnson has not yet scheduled a vote on the Senate's Homeland Security funding bill, which was passed without funding for immigration and customs enforcement and parts of Customs and Border Protection, leaving TSA workers and Coast Guard personnel still dependent on an executive order for their paychecks. Senate Republicans are planning to fund those immigration agencies separately through budget reconciliation with a June 1st deadline. Now turning to Washington and the latest actions from the current administration. Here are 10 significant developments from the administration this week. The United States naval blockade of Iranian ports, announced by President Trump on Sunday night and in force since Monday morning, is now drawing international pushback from China, Russia, and European allies alike. China's foreign ministry called the blockade dangerous and irresponsible. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the United Kingdom is not supporting the blockade, and European nations are organizing their own summit in Paris to discuss freedom of navigation, mine clearing, and restoring Strait of Hormuz transit, independent of American efforts. The administration has framed the blockade as economic pressure to bring Iran back to the negotiating table on nuclear weapons and the reopening of the strait. The United States proposed a 20-year halt to Iranian nuclear enrichment during the Islamabad talks, according to multiple sources familiar with the negotiations. Iran's delegation countered with a proposal for a 3 to 5 year suspension, a gap so large that American negotiators described it as the primary reason the talks broke down. The administration also asked Iran to physically remove its stockpile of highly enriched uranium from the country, while Tehran offered a monitored dilution process instead. Vice President Vance said Tuesday at a Turning Point USA event in Athens, Georgia, that he remains committed to pursuing the grand bargain President Trump wants with Iran, but only if Tehran commits to no nuclear weapon. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche announced that the Department of Justice will prosecute anyone who purchases or sells sanctioned Iranian oil in defiance of the blockade. Blanche issued the warning publicly as the blockade took effect Monday, extending legal risk to shipping companies, financial institutions, and buyers in any country who engage in transactions involving Iranian petroleum in violation of United States sanctions. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has threatened that any military vessels entering their claimed zone of the strait will be considered in violation of the ceasefire and will face a firm response. Iran's military was observed during the ceasefire period, removing debris blocking the entrances to its underground missile bases, according to satellite imagery reviewed by analysts. The images showed front-end loaders clearing rubble from blocked tunnel entrances that American and Israeli forces had targeted during the first 6 weeks of the war, indicating Iran was reconstituting some of the missile-launching capabilities that had been degraded during combat operations. United States intelligence had previously assessed that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers remained intact after a month of fighting, with many possibly buried underground following strikes on tunnel entrances. The White House is preparing an Iran war supplemental funding request to Congress estimated at between $80 billion and $100 billion, according to reporting citing administration sources, scaling back significantly from the $200 billion the Pentagon had initially indicated it would seek. The request will be central to the congressional debate this week, with Democrats threatening to withhold votes for any additional war funding unless the administration secures proper congressional authorization for the conflict. Several Republicans in both chambers have also signaled hesitation about approving more funding without a clearer plan for how and when the conflict ends. The Trump administration fired 6 immigration judges on Friday, April 11th, including the 2 judges who had dismissed high-profile deportation cases against pro-Palestinian student activists Rumeisa Öztürk of Tufts University and Mohsen Mahdawi of Columbia University. Judges Rupal Patel and Nina Froese were among more than 113 immigration judges fired by the Trump administration since January 2025. The National Association of Immigration Judges warns that the systematic removal of judges is creating widespread due process failures across the immigration court system, with backlogs growing and remaining judges reportedly under pressure to increase deportation orders. Cabinet secretaries and senior administration officials are scheduled to testify before Congress this week as lawmakers review the president's fiscal year 2027 budget proposal. Among those scheduled to appear are Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, Energy Secretary Chris Wright, and Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Vought. The hearings come as Republicans and Democrats clash sharply over the budget's proposed $1.5 trillion defense spending increase, alongside deep cuts to domestic programs for healthcare, housing, and education. The administration confirmed this week that a second round of United States-Iran nuclear and ceasefire negotiations could take place as early as this week, with Pakistan again serving as the host nation. Vice President Vance confirmed he expects to lead the American delegation if talks resume. The administration has acknowledged that the talks in Islamabad went further than any previous diplomatic engagement between the two countries since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, but that the gap on the single issue of nuclear enrichment proved insurmountable in that session. The United States military said it destroyed 2 vessels in the eastern Pacific Ocean on Sunday that it described as drug smuggling boats, killing 2 people as part of the Trump administration's ongoing campaign to use military force against alleged narcotics traffickers operating in international waters. The operation is part of a broader administration policy authorizing the Navy and other military branches to interdict suspected drug vessels in the Pacific and Atlantic. Critics have raised concerns about the legal framework and due process implications of military lethal force against civilian vessels in peacetime waters. The administration is also navigating a widening rift with the Vatican after President Trump publicly attacked Pope Leo XIV on Sunday and then shared an artificial intelligence-generated image of himself as a Christ-like figure, a post he deleted Monday after widespread condemnation from Catholic leaders, Republican senators, and allied foreign governments, including Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Senate Majority Leader John Thune told reporters Monday he would leave the church alone. Pope Leo, speaking from the papal plane to reporters Monday, said he has no fear of the Trump administration and will continue to speak out against war. The extraordinary public confrontation between the president and the first American pope has drawn international attention and diplomatic concern. That's your full briefing for Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. I'm Nova Blake. Stay informed, stay ahead. We'll see you next time.